Good afternoon, everyone. On international procurement management. The coursework is on the case study of COVID-19 and global value chains. So looking at the questions that we have to attend to, one goes as part A, using examples, discuss the lessons learned from COVID-19 pandemic for firms that engage in global value chains. Here we're going to look at the definition of global value chains and the lessons that we learned from COVID-19 pandemic for the firms that engage in global value chains. Introduction is on the definition. Global value chain is a complex network of activities that companies and countries undertake to design, produce, market, and deliver goods and services on a global scale. It involves various stages from raw material extraction to final consumption, and often includes multiple countries collaborating in different aspects of international production sharing. The coronavirus pandemic took the whole world by storm, and every aspect of our lives was disrupted, from health, freedom of movement, employment, the economy, and the ability to buy goods, and virtually every global value chain. The coronavirus pandemic was unlike any other crisis in our lifetime, and it hasn't been easy, but there are some key global supply chain lessons to take away from the COVID-19 pandemic. The first lesson that we're going to look at is the importance of building agility and flexibility into supply chain. Here we look at the firms that engage in global value chain. They learn to quickly pivot production to meet shifting consumer demands and address supply chain disruptions by adopting more modular, scalable, and adaptable processes, structures, contracts, responding to customization requirements, reacting to alternation in product design, and alternate supply sourcing. For example, some manufacturers like SKM shifted parts of their production capacity from producing automobiles to producing ventilators and personal protective equipment. Another lesson that we are going to look at is the importance of moving towards a fully digital supply chain. For example, firms learned the importance of accelerating digitalization efforts to enable remote work, online collaboration, and e-commerce. For example, Nike used predictive analysis to selectively mark down goods and reduce production early on and minimize on the impact of supply chain disruptions.
Strategy number 3, we look at the unsustainable just-in-time manufacturing. COVID-19 exposed the vulnerabilities and deficiencies of the just-in-time global supply chain. Herein, companies learned to balance just-in-time with preparedness, responsiveness, and resilience. So they learned to balance between just-in-time and just-in-case by having sufficient backup inventory keeper and then safety stock. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you, Jackie. Another lesson they learned was the importance of emphasis on diversification and localization of a global supply chain. For example, global automotive industries, when they were faced with a shortage of semiconductors, which were mainly produced in China, this made them appreciate the diversification and the need also to localize their sources of supply by finding alternative suppliers in different regions or countries, or increasing their domestic production and sourcing. For example, like in Uganda, we learned to rely on local suppliers for the PEPs, for example, like Nightingale and other companies that produce linen or clothing, and as well as basing on the companies that do alcohol to produce sanitizers. like Uganda Warrage. Thank you. Another one was the importance of knowing the supply chain from point of origin to the last customer. That is the visibility of the supply chain. Companies became aware of the entire supply chain network and the interplay between the supply chain players, and embraced the idea of conducting comprehensive mapping of their supply chain so that to predict and prepare for the disruptions on the supply side. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. And then the last lesson learned was appreciate the role of collaboration and partnerships. Reacting to COVID-19 outbreak required a huge mobilization across global supply chain, with suppliers working along each other, constantly collaborating and communicating to make sure there were no gaps. So for example, like pharmaceutical companies, they collaborated with government and research institutions to see how they can develop vaccines that were used for helping to treat people with COVID, and some even became well.
Thank you. Another strategy, rather, was investing in innovation and digitalization of the supply chain network. Global manufacturing companies are adopting a range of technologies such as analytics, artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, and digital platforms to enable them have access to new solutions every day for running scenarios and assessing trade-offs, thereby improving transparency and accelerating responses. Another strategy is supply chain resilience. Firms that value resilience focus more on the speed of recovery to return to normal operations in an acceptable period of time after being disrupted. For example, firms that favor long-term relationships with the various suppliers shorten the cost because they can diversify, and the hit is not really hard on them. Thank you. Janat?
Another strategy that we can look at is diversification of supplier network. Here, the supplier-based diversification is a key strategy for business seeking to enhance their robustness against supply chain disruptions. The companies realize that dependence upon a single supplier creates risks of interruption. So firms need to have a range of alternative suppliers for each of their inputs. Next to you, Jackie.
Another strategy is the collaboration. Collaboration is more where the supply chain members come together, they prepare and respond to any disruption. It's a joint effort that enables them to monitor disruptions, build warning systems, manage risks, and overall come up with innovative solutions to build more robust systems. The last strategy is the regionalization or localization, where regionalization is sometimes known as the localization. It's a solution to over-reliance on overseas suppliers or dependence on governments of another country. So firms need to not completely go away from globalization, but to balance offshoring, nearshoring to de-risk the supply chain. In conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a wake-up call for many global value chains, revealing their weaknesses and vulnerabilities, but also their opportunities and potential. By learning from these key lessons of the pandemic, supply chains are more vigilant and are considering transformation of their challenges into strength to remain more resilient, responsive, and competitive in any future pandemic, similar or worse than COVID-19. This brings us to the end of the presentation.